Good afternoon, and welcome to the Daily Journal's Capitol View webcast, where we talk about Mississippi politics every Monday afternoon. I'm Chris Kiefer, managing editor for multimedia here at the Daily Journal. And as always, we are joined by Daily Journal Capitol Bureau Chief Bobby Harrison. Bobby, what's going on this week?
Just talking about revenue and state revenue collections and those types of things, Chris. Just another exciting week in the in state government.
Just another week in the capital city. Bobby, we'll start, as you said, talking state revenue, and then we'll get, after that a little bit more into the internet sales tax, which is, I guess, all connected. Revenue numbers are still, you've written, they've been down for several years, and the legislative leaders got together last week to start the process for next year's budget, and it doesn't look like revenue is getting any better. Tell us the latest on that.
No, that was actually kind of surprising because the first 3 months of the current budget year, the fiscal year begins on July 1st, and the first 3 months revenue is actually up for a change compared to last year and previous years. But the state economist Darren Webb warned at that meeting that those numbers were kind of inflated because of some quirks and some one-time collections and some money that should have been collected earlier that wasn't, should have been deposited in the state general fund earlier, but wasn't. And when all those things were taken into account, revenue wasn't doing that well for the first 3 months of the current budget year. And lo and behold, I just got finished writing a story, Chris, just a few minutes ago, talking about October revenue collections. In October, they were down again. So I guess Darren Webb knows about revenue and those types of things. So just as I pointed out in the story, there's been some increase year over year, and not much, but on a couple of recent years. But in other recent years, there hadn't been any increase at all, and that's unusual. In the past, when there's been dips in revenue collections, it's been during recession. There were the two years back in the so-called Great Recession, and back in 08 and 09 or 09, 010, I can't remember exactly where all took place. There was big dips then because Mississippi was was part of the national economy, and there was a huge recession going on. And there was another dip in the early 2000s during another national recession, and outside of that, there hadn't many dips of revenue until in recent years, before the current revenue. There hadn't been any dips, and going all the way back to 1970, except for those years I talked about during the recessions. And so it's just kind of unusual. And I think two things are going on. Mississippi economy's struggling to recover from the recession. It's struggling more than most other states, and also at the same time, the legislature has enacted a multiple tax cuts that taken about $350 million out of the revenue stream already, and it's poised to take another $435 million or so out of the revenue stream over the next 10 years. So I think those two things, the state economy and the tax cuts that've been imposed are impacting the revenue collections, and that's why we've seen cuts in a lot of agencies, and just this past week. University of Southern Mississippi, I noticed, we don't really cover Southern Miss that much, even though it's a fine university, and yours truly is a graduate of it.
Yeah.
But just this past week, Southern announced that they were laying off 80 staff members, and that's all directly related to a cut in state money going to the universities because of the downturn in revenue collections.
Yeah, looking at some of the numbers there, kind of as you said, it was the only 3 years of declining revenue since 1970 until the current period, which could potentially be 3 of the 4 years if they're right about the revenue being down, if the projection is right and the revenue is still down. There's a debate, I guess, on how much is it Mississippi not coming out of the recession? How much does the tax cuts have to do with it? I know that you are not Darren Webb to be able to answer, exactly what the impact of the tax cuts are, but tell us a little bit about both sides. I know a lot of legislative Democrats are saying, hey, we've got to look at the tax cuts and maybe they've gone too far and revenue's gone down. And meanwhile, Tate Reeves and Philip Gunn are, defending those cuts.
Yeah, they Philip Gunn and Tate Reeves and the governor Phil Bryant all say in the long term these cuts are these tax cuts are going to pay for themselves, and result in a stronger economy, economic growth. And when you have economic growth, of course, you have state revenue increases, and so in the long term, it's all going to work out for the state. I guess time will tell whether they're right, but there's no denying the fact that currently revenue collections are down, and currently the economy is not doing well. You may have my story there in front of you, Chris.
Yeah, I've got those numbers.
Look at not revenue growth, but just economic growth over the past since the recession, and it's just startling how slow the Mississippi's growth being compared to the rest of the country, the rest of the region, and then also compared to our surrounding states. It's just startling how slow we have, how slow our recovery has been.
Yeah, let me give those numbers real quick. I just had it. And last year, it is since the bottom of the recession, Mississippi has experienced economic growth of 1.7%. That's compared to national growth of 14.1%, regional growth, if you take out Mississippi, of 16.9%. And if you look at the 4 states bordering Mississippi, that's 8.2% growth. All that, again, compared to just 1.7% in Mississippi.
Yeah. So, and Webb, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Webb attributes a lot of that. Those numbers are separate from the revenue collection numbers are separate from that. This is just economic growth, or I guess. And Webb, points out that Mississippi is just struggling to kind of find its place in the new economy. He talks about we have a human capital deficiency or deficit, if you will, and by that he means we have a less educated workforce overall. That's not to say we don't have a bunch of smart and good workers, but we just have less. The education level of our workers is less than the surrounding states, the nation, and the region. And then also we have other human capital deficiencies, such as we have more workers in poor health. We have a larger percentage of our population is disabled. Which is, I kind of extrapolate that, and this is just Bobby Harrison's theory, that we have more disabled people because we have more people who don't have insurance and don't have access to health care, and they don't get the proper health care when
preventative
health care when some of these things could have been offset. I've heard doctors talk about the fact that there's so many diabetics in the state who, if they've gotten treatment early on, they could have dealt with that and continued to live a more productive life. But because of the issues they faced and didn't get treatment, it resulted in, legs being amputated or whatnot. And then, and that makes it, if you're a logger and you have your leg amputated, it's kind of hard to make a living, and, you end up on disability. And so, so we have a larger percentage of our population on disability. And the way I pointed out in the past, we were able to depend on low-paying, sort of low-skilled jobs to make do, but he said a lot of those jobs have left the state and left the country, and Donald Trump talks about bringing those jobs back, but it may be hard to bring those jobs back, and B, those aren't the jobs we want in the new economy. We want higher tech, better paying jobs, but to do that we got to increase the skills of our workforce. So it's always it's just we got a long way to go, and some people would argue, because of all the needs facing the state, now it's not the time to be cutting taxes. The flip side of that is, as I pointed out, the Republican leadership of the state said the tax cuts will help spur this growth. So we just have to see who's right in the long run.
Yeah, and so what it also means, at least in the short term, is not having a lot of revenue. And you've written a lot about just cuts over recent years because of revenue coming in less. And I guess it's been slight declines, but almost, if you look at it, it's just kind of been stagnant over the last maybe four fiscal years. I can't find that number. I think it was what year would it be? 2015. State revenue was at $5.4 billion, and the projection for 19 has $5.42 billion. So, I guess it stayed pretty flat between other costs going up and other needs. You've had a lot of cuts around departments, and you're also looking at needs. We've talked a lot about the needs for bridge and road maintenance. If you're going into this legislative session with, again, not much more extra revenue, it's going to be another tough session, I would imagine, to meet a lot of
Right.
those needs. Right?
Yeah, and Chris, just that number you pointed out, that growth of between 2015 and the projections for 2019, the growth is less than 0.5% during that time period. I mean, what's normal for the state is growth of 2 to 3% or even better. And there's been times
per year, right?
Right, year over year. That's
Yeah.
the normal growth, and that adds up after a while, because 1% growth is essentially about $100 million now. So in round numbers. So but and like during the casino boom in the 1990s, when the state first legalized casino gambling, and we had that huge construction boom, and then the boom from all the casinos going online, we had growth over several years of double-digit growth, and then we had large growth in after Hurricane Katrina and that rebuilding effort. But normally our growth rate is about 2 to 3% a year, outside of those exceptional circumstances with Katrina and the casinos. But right now we're having no growth or negative growth over a 4 to 5 year period, and that's the issue. And it's made for some tough legislative sessions with. And we're probably going to have another tough session coming up, as you just pointed out, with education's asking for more money. MAEP is continuously underfunded, and the state board of education believes we should do more in the area of early childhood education. They believe they're making some headway with that, but they're only getting, I think, $4 million, and they're asking for another $6 million, which is a $6 billion budget. It's not much, but when you factor that in with all the other, community colleges, universities have taken big cuts, and people have seen big tuition increases, and so that, it's just a long, litany of issues that the legislature is going to face during the coming session.
And it's against that backdrop of revenue woes that the state's had, that the Department of Revenue made a surprise announcement last week that they're going to start requiring all online retailers, or just about all of them. I think everyone that's over is a $250,000 threshold of sales in the state is going to have to start collecting the 7%. Essentially, it's just a 7% sales tax. I guess it's technically a use tax, but a 7% tax on all items sold over the internet. Previously, well, I guess the Supreme Court law, we'll get into all that, actually says that you have to have a brick and mortar presence in the state, and they're going to kind of maybe go challenge that law as other states are. But is this something that we've talked about again on this program before, that the state's been looking at doing before? Is the House, I know, even passed a bill that didn't get through the Senate that would have required this to happen. I guess just to start the discussion on this, Bobby, this is coming at a time of revenue woes for the state. Assuming this goes through, I mean, how much of a difference, can this make, or would this really just kind of be a drop in the bucket?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think at this point it's going to be closer to a drop in the bucket. But every dollar counts and helps, I guess. But a lot of these companies are already voluntarily collecting this tax for the state. So there's fewer and fewer companies that aren't collecting. I think these companies see the handwriting on the wall that eventually that Supreme Court ruling from 1992 is going to be overturned, and there's going to be some type of mechanism to require these taxes to be collected by these online retailers. Just like if you go into Reed's or Walmart or any other local store and buy something, you pay that 7% sales tax right there, and the store remits that money to the state. But the online retailers have not had to do that based on a Supreme Court ruling, as you mentioned, but more and more of them are beginning to do it. But the Department of Revenue is going to try to force all of them to do it. We're talking about maybe, a top end, another $100 million for the state. But I think that would be an optimistic number right now, because I think, in my mind's eye, Amazon's by far the biggest retailer, online retailer, and they're already collecting the tax. And interestingly, Chris, not too long after Amazon, just sort of a side note, which I thought was kind of neat, that right after Amazon agreed to voluntarily collect the tax for the state, it was announced that Amazon was buying or absorbing Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And so there's a Whole Foods in Jackson. I know maybe another one in the state, but I know there's one in Jackson. So now I guess you could argue Amazon has a brick and mortar presence in the state, so they'd have to collect the tax anyway.
Yeah,
So maybe
yeah, right.
Maybe they knew that was happening. I don't know. But at any rate, it's going to be, you know, the some people in the legislature wanted to pass laws requiring the Department of Revenue to do this. The Department they couldn't get those bills through the process. They were killed in the Senate. The Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, I should say, opposed them. And but now the Department of Revenue, its Commissioner Herb Frierson said that under existing law, they already have the authority to try to force the online retailers to collect this tax. Now, the flip side is an online retailer could say no. The Supreme Court said we don't have to collect it, so it could end up in court again. But as the Department of Revenue pointed out, there's already several cases like this going through the system in other states. So it'll probably be decided before Mississippi ends up in court itself. So, because I know Alabama has been aggressive in trying to pursue this, and maybe Colorado and some other states. It's kind of a, you know, some Republicans are opposed to this, but it's kind of a bipartisan issue. There's a lot of Republicans, including House Speaker Philip Gahn, Governor Phil Bryant, who agree that the online sales tax should be collected. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on one hand, you know, while it's viewed as a tax increase, it's also viewed as having some fairness for the local businesses that have to take that tax, whereas the online retailers aren't taking the tax, and so it's almost like they're subsidized. And so
yeah, some people argue it's just kind of leveling the playing field.
Right. Bobby, I know that effort back in the legislative session last year when the House tried to pass the bill requiring it, at that time they would have flagged that money for road and bridge needs. I would assume right now the money's just going to the general fund. Do you think it'll stay that way, or do you think the legislature might make some kind of action to earmark the money for a specific need?
Well, that could be a big fight in the legislature, Chris, because, you know, there's some people who do want to direct at least a portion of that money to road and bridge needs, but then you got people, you know, Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves points out that, you know, the general fund, as we spent the first part of this little discussion talking about the, you know, tax collections being down, and, you know, there's people who say we need this money to just prop up the just the state general fund, and so there could be an argument about where this money goes when it is collected. But right now, it all is just going into the general fund, and that goes for education, public health, law enforcement. Incidentally, just getting way down the weeds, the Department of Transportation has a separate tax that goes directly to for road and bridge needs, and that's the 18.4% tax on a gallon of gasoline. So I mean, they have their own sort of revenue stream that also is not bringing in the amount of money that is needed for the, you know, as we talked about, for the road and bridge needs across the state.
Yeah. So going back, Bobby, to kind of wrap everything up, going back to the budget process, we mentioned that the legislative leaders met last week, agreed to the revenue estimate, and that's, you know, where it looks at potentially being less revenue next year than the current year. So they've got the revenue estimate now. Kind of walk us through what'll happen from here on out until the budget is finally adopted, I guess, toward the end of the session around April or so, right?
Yeah. Well, and either this month or next month, both the legislative leadership and the governor released their budget recommendations, their budget proposals, and, you know, those are kind of certain. And then the session will begin in January, and those two proposals, one from the governor, one from the legislative leadership, would kind of be at least a starting point as committee meetings begin, and probably about in late March, they'll take another look at revenue before they finally agree on the final budget numbers, and they'll adopt those budget numbers and adopt a budget in sometimes in March, and that budget to go into effect on July 1st. Got it.
All right. Well, Bobby, thanks again. Always good to have you. And again, reminder, you can catch Capitol View each Monday at 2:00 at djournal.com. You can also see the replay there on our website as well as on our Facebook page. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, Chris.